because cheese was important to them. The two little people spent a long time trying to decide what to do. All they could think, trying to decide what to do, all they could think of was to keep looking around cheeseless Station C to see if the cheese was really gone. While Sniff and Scurry had quickly moved on, Hem and Haw continued to hem and haw. They ranted and raved at the injustice of it all. Haw started to get depressed. What would happen if the cheese wasn't there tomorrow? If the cheese wasn't there tomorrow. He had made future plans based on this cheese. The little people couldn't believe it. How could this have happened? No one had warned them. It wasn't right. It was not the way things were supposed to be. Hem and Haw went home that night hungry and discouraged. Before they left, Haw wrote on the wall, "The more important your cheese is to you, the more you want to hold on to it." The next day, Hem and Haw left their homes and returned to Cheese Station C again, where they still expected somehow to find their cheese. The situation hadn't changed. The cheese was no longer there. The little people didn't know what to do. Hem and Haw just stood there, immobilized like two statues. Haw shut his eyes as tight as he could and put his hands over his ears. He just wanted to block everything out. He didn't want to know the cheese supply had gradually been getting smaller. He had believed it had moved all of a sudden. Hem analyzed the situation over and over, and eventually his complicated brain, with huge belief system took hold. "Why did they do this to me?" he demanded. "What's really going on here?" Finally, Haw opened his eyes, looked around, and said, "By the way, where's Sniff and Scurry? Do you think they know something we don't?" Hem scoffed. "What would they know?" Hem continued. "They're just simple mice. They just respond to what happens. We're little people. We're special. We should be able to figure this out. And besides, we deserve better. This should not have happened to us. Or if it does, we should at least get some benefits." "Why should we get benefits?" Haw asked. "Because we're entitled," Hem claimed. "Entitled to what?" Hem wanted to know. "We're entitled to our cheese." "Why?" Haw asked. "Because we didn't cause this problem," Hem said. "Somebody else did this, and we should get something out of it," Haw suggested. "Maybe we should stop analyzing the situation so much and just get going and find some new cheese." "Oh no," Hem argued. "I'm going to get to the bottom of this." While Hem and Haw were still deciding what to do, Sniff and Scurry were already on their way. They went further into the maze, up and down the corridors, looking for cheese in every cheese station they could find. They didn't think of anything else but finding new cheese. They didn't find any for some time until they finally went into an area of the maze where they had never been before. Cheese Station N. They squealed in delight. They found what they had been looking for, a great supply of new cheese. They could hardly believe their eyes. It was the biggest store of cheese the mice have ever seen. In the meantime, Hem and Haw were still back in Cheese Station C evaluating their situation. They were now suffering from the effects of having no cheese. They were becoming frustrated and angry and were blaming each other for the situation they were in. Now and then, Haw thought about his mice buddies, Sniff and Scurry, and wondered if they had found any cheese yet. He believed they might be having a hard time, as running through the maze usually involved some uncertainty. But he also knew that it was likely only to last for a while. Sometimes, Haw would imagine Sniff and Scurry finding new cheese and enjoying it. He thought about how good it would be for him to be out on an adventure in the maze and to find fresh new cheese. He could almost taste it. The more clearly the image of himself finding and enjoying the new cheese, the more he saw himself leaving Cheese Station C. "Let's go," he exclaimed all of a sudden. "No," Ham quickly responded. "I like it here. It's comfortable. It's what I want. It's what I want now. Besides, it's dangerous out there." "No, it isn't," Haw argued. "We've run through many parts of the maze before, and we could do it again." "I'm getting too old for that," Ham said, "and I'm afraid I'm not interested in getting lost and making a fool of myself. Are you?" With that, Haw's fear of falling returned, and his hope of finding new cheese faded. So every day, the little people continued to do what they had done before. They went to Cheese Station C, found no cheese, and returned home, carrying their worries and frustrations with them. They tried to deny what was happening, but found it harder to get to sleep. Had less energy the next day and were becoming irritable. Their homes were not nurturing places they once were. The little people had difficulty sleeping and were having nightmares about not finding any cheese. But Hem and Haw still returned to Cheese Station C and waited there every day. Hem said, "You know, if we just work harder, we'll find that nothing has really changed that much. The cheese is probably nearby. Maybe they just hid it behind the wall." The next day, Hem and Haw returned with tools. Hem held the chisel while Haw banged the hammer until they made a big hole into the wall of Cheese Station C. They peered inside but found no cheese. They were disappointed, but believed they could solve this problem. So they started earlier, stayed longer, worked harder. But after a while, all they had was a large hole in the wall. Haw was beginning to realize the difference between activity and productivity. "Maybe," Hem said, "we should just sit here and see what happens. Sooner or later, they'll have to put the cheese back." Haw wanted to believe that. So each day, he went home to rest and returned reluctantly with Hem to Cheese Station C. But cheese was never reappeared. By now, the little people were growing weak from hunger and stress. Haw was getting tired of just waiting for their situation to improve. He began to see that the longer they stayed in their cheeseless situation, the worse off they would be. Haw knew they were losing their edge. Finally, one day, Haw began to laugh at himself. Haw, look at me. I keep doing the same things over and over again, and I wonder why things don't get better. If this wasn't so ridiculous, It would be even funnier. Ha did not like the idea of having to run through the maze again because he knew he would get lost and have no idea he would find any cheese. But he had to laugh at his folly when he saw what his fear was doing to him. He asked Hem, "Where did we put our jogging suits and running shoes?" It took a long time to find them because they had put everything away when they found cheese at Cheese Station C, thinking that they wouldn't need them anymore. As Hem saw his friend getting into his running gear, he said, You're not really going to run out into the maze again, are you? Why don't you just wait here with me until they put the cheese back?" "Because you just don't get it," Haas said. "I didn't want to see it either, but now I realize they're never going to put the old cheese back. That was yesterday's cheese. It's time to find new cheese." Ham argued. "But what if there's no cheese out there? Or even if there is, what if you don't find it?" "I don't know," Haas said. He asked himself if those same questions too many times and started to feel the fears again that kept him where he was. Then he thought about finding new cheese and all the good things that came with it and gathered his courage. "Sometimes," Haas said, "things change and they're never the same again. This looks like one of those times, Hem. That's life. Life moves on, as should we." Ha looked at his emancipated companion and tried to talk some sense to him. But Hem's fear had turned into anger and he wouldn't listen. Ha didn't mean to be rude to his friend, but he had to laugh at how silly they both looked. As Ha prepared to leave, he started to feel more alive, knowing that he was finally able to laugh at himself. "Let's go and move on," he announced. "It's maze time." Hem didn't laugh and he didn't respond. Ha picked up a small, sharp rock and wrote a serious thought on the wall for Hem to think about. As was his custom, Ha even drew a picture of cheese around it, hoping that it will help Hem to smile, lighten up, and go after new cheese. But Hem didn't want to see it. It read, "If you do not change, you can become extinct." Then Ha stuck his head out and peered anxiously into the maze. He thought about how he'd gotten himself into this cheeseless situation. He had believed that there may not be any cheese in the maze, or he may not find it. Such fearful beliefs were immobilizing him and killing him. Ha smiled. He knew Hem was wondering, who moves my cheese? But Ha was wondering, why didn't I get up and move with the cheese sooner? As he started out into the maze, Ha looked back to where he had come from and felt its comfort. He could feel himself being drawn back into a familiar territory, even though he hadn't found cheese there for some time. Ha became more anxious and wondered if he really wanted to go out into the maze. He wrote a saying on the wall ahead of him and stared at it for some time. What would you do if you weren't afraid? He thought about it. He knew sometimes fear can be good, but when you are afraid things are going to get worse if you don't do something, it can prompt you into action. But it is not good when you are so afraid that it keeps you from doing anything. He looked to his right, to the part of the maze where he had never been, and felt the fear. Then he took a deep breath, turned right into the maze, and jumped slowly into the unknown. As he tried to find his way, Ha worried at first that he might have waited too long in Cheese Station C. He hadn't had any cheese for so long that he was now weak. It took him longer and it was more painful than usual to get through the maze. He decided that if he ever got the chance again, he would adapt to change sooner. It would make things easier. Then Ha smiled a weak smile as he thought, better late than never. During the next several days, Ha found a little cheese here and there, but nothing that lasted very long. He had hoped to find enough cheese, to take some back to him and encourage him to come out into the maze. But Ha didn't feel confident enough yet. He had to admit he found it confusing in the maze. Things seemed to have changed since the last time he was out here. Just when he thought things were getting ahead, he would get lost in the corridors. It seemed his progress was 2 steps forward and 1 step backwards. It was a challenge, but he had to admit that back in the maze, hunting for cheese wasn't as nearly as bad as he feared it might be. As time went on, he began to wonder if it was realistic for him to expect new cheese. He wondered if he had bitten off more than he could chew. Then he laughed, realizing that he had nothing to chew on at the moment. Whenever he started to get discouraged, he reminded himself that what he was doing, as uncomfortable as it was at the moment, was in reality much better than staying in the cheeseless situation. He was taking control rather than simply letting things happen to him. Then he reminded himself, if Sniff and Scurry could move on, so could he. Later, as Ha looked back on things, he realized that the cheese at Cheese Station C had not just disappeared overnight, as he once thought. The amount of cheese that had been there toward the end had been getting smaller. That what was left had grown old, and it didn't taste as good.